Hello, my friends. How are you? It is so good to see you. How have you been? How are you? So today we come back to the Enneagram. We come back to our personality types. Today we look at type 5s. We've been looking at types 1 through 4, and today we look at type 5s. Some of the words that we associate with type 5s are innovators, observers, specialists, radicals, the expert. So those are some of the ways that we refer to those who are type 5s. Now, as you are very well aware, we start with the quiz, numbers 1 through 15, and I'd like you to score each question. You're going to score it 1 through 5, 1 being not at all true, 2 seldom true, 3 somewhat true, 4 generally true, 5 very true. So each question gets a number 1 through 5. You ready? Number 1. I like to get into things in depth and pore over details until I've figured something out as completely as possible. So score that 1 to 5. I like to get into things in depth and pore over details until I've figured out something as completely as possible. Number 2. I am an extremely private person who doesn't let many people into my world. I am an extremely private person who doesn't let many people into my world. Score that 1 through 5. Number 3. I do not feel very big or powerful, more small and invisible. I make a good spy. I do not feel very big or powerful, more small and invisible. I'd make a good spy. Number 4. Other people would think I'm crazy if they knew what I was thinking most of the time. Other people would think I'm crazy if they knew what I was thinking most of the time. Number 5. Only by getting accurate information can you make a rational decision, but then most people aren't really rational. Only by getting accurate information can you make a rational decision, but then most people aren't really rational. Number 6. My family thinks I am somewhat strange or eccentric. They've certainly told me I need to get out more. My family thinks that I am somewhat strange or eccentric. They've certainly told me I need to get out more. Number 7. I can talk a blue streak when I want to. Most of the time, though, I prefer to just watch all the craziness around me. I can talk a blue streak when I want to. Most of the time, though, I prefer to just watch all the craziness around me. Number 8. If you need a problem solved, let me work on it myself, and I'll come up with the answer. If you need a problem solved, let me work on it by myself, and I'll come up with the answer. 1 through 5. 1 not at all true, 5 very true. Number 9. When you really think about it, you can't get much stranger than so-called normal behavior. When you really think about it, you can't get much stranger than so-called normal behavior. Number 10. I tend to take a long time fine-tuning projects I'm working on. I tend to take a long time fine-tuning projects I'm working on. 11. Most people are so incredibly ignorant, it's amazing that anything works at all. Most people are so incredibly ignorant, it's amazing that anything works at all. Number 12. I know a lot about a lot of things, and in a few areas I consider myself an expert. I know a lot about a lot of things, and in a few areas I consider myself an expert. You're going to rate that one 1 through 5. 13. I am an extremely curious and enjoy investigating why things are the way they are. Even obvious things are not really so obvious when you really look at them. I am extremely curious and enjoy investigating why things are the way they are. Even obvious things are not really so obvious when you really look at them. Number 14. My mind is so intense and active that I often feel like it's on fire. My mind is so intense and active that I often feel like it's on fire. And 15. Often I lose track of time because I'm concentrating so completely on what I'm doing. Often I lose all track of time because I'm concentrating so completely on what I'm doing. So what you're going to do now is add up the points for that. Add up all the points that you got. If you got fewer than 15 points, chances are you're not a withdrawn type. If you got 15 to 30 points, you're probably not a type 5. 30 to 45 points, you most probably have 5 issues or a type 5 parent. 45 to 60 points, you most likely have a 5 component. And 60 to 75 points, you are most likely a type 5. So let's go ahead and look at type 5s in more detail. The basic fear of a type 5 would be the idea of being helpless or useless, of being incapable, of feeling overwhelmed. That for a type 5 is an awful, awful feeling. Their basic desire is to be capable and competent, to feel as though they are useful and important. That's really key for the happiness of a type 5. You are good or okay if you have mastered something. That's kind of what the super ego message is that they get. You are good, and you're a good person. You're good to go if you have mastered something. They tend not to believe in truths and doctrines until they have tested out the things themselves. So, they tend not to believe you, and they tend not to believe in what they see or hear or read about until they test out the doctrine or the truth themselves. So they're constantly testing boundaries and testing the edge and making sure that what you say and do is true, making sure that what they read is true. So they're constantly testing. They tend to be They tend to be insecure about what they can do. They tend to feel as though they're not as good as others at it, so they feel very insecure. Um, they really value knowledge and understanding, so they're very observation oriented. They really love to sit back and observe others and watch. They tend to have really intense focus. They can really focus on things, and they tend to have an area of expertise in something. They will find like one niche or one area, and they will sort of laser focus in on that one niche or area and become experts in it, and just learn everything that they can about it to become masters of that one area, or really, really brilliant in that one area. They love being known, or people come to them for help and support in that area because they're known to be an expert in that field. They want to be amazing in that area. They unfortunately they can sort of lose sight of real issues and things like paying the bills, because they're so focused in on that one area of expertise. So it can be a little bit impractical. Sometimes they retreat so much into that mental space and into that laser focus that they lose sight of kind of taking care of the practical needs and things that they're supposed to be doing, and that can get a little bit difficult. As kids, they tend to be quieter kids, a little bit more withdrawn. They're very, very creative people. A lot of times they can be so creative, they could create their own worlds. They tend to be people who dive into fantasies. They can create their own fantasy worlds and spend hours in them. They tend to see the world fairly clearly, and they tend to be pretty observant of what's going on. So, they tend to be at a fairly young age aware kind of what's going on around them, very observant. They might recognize, like they're the kind of kids who kind of recognize when mom's having an affair, or dad's having an affair, or mom and dad aren't doing well together. They recognize it at a really early age, and they tend to they develop their own fantasy world that they will then dive into mentally, so that they can escape the fact that the real world is a scary, unstable place. So they develop this fantasy world that is much safer and happier. They tend not to want people to bother them. They like to be sort of left alone, and their favorite idea is the idea of non-intrusion. Don't bother me, just leave me alone to my fantasy world. They tend to be somewhat distant from their mothers, and they tend to teach themselves not to want that emotional nurturing, which it's kind of a conundrum, because they do want the nurturing, but when they don't get it from the mom, they try to tell themselves they don't want it, and so they distance themselves from their moms and kind of further withdraw into themselves. And it becomes kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy of, well, I don't want her love, even though secretly they do. And so they push her away, which becomes then the fulfilling prophecy of, well, she doesn't want or love me. And so then they further withdraw more and more into themselves. Fives go through life avoiding the things they most want, repressing their longing, and finding substitute pleasures in their interests, hobbies, and creativity. And so what they truly want usually is connection and love, and they are so afraid of not finding it that They tend to create the fantasy worlds in their heads and seek out connection there in their heads, which is not real. And so it is kind of a fake connection or a not real connection. It is a fantasy. But in some ways, it seems safer and more real than trying to make a connection with a human being who is not always going to be there. They are considered kind of creative loners. A healthy 5 with a 4 wing, meaning a healthy 5 who leans into the 4 side, they tend to have unique personal visions. They're more emotional and introspective and creative. They tend to have their own kind of creative niche. They're also often creative, mixing passion and detachment, and whimsical. And so they have wonderfully kind of creative ways of having an outlet. Now, some examples of some famous 5s, and you'll hear the creative kind of whimsical, sometimes a little spooky niches. We've got David Lynch, Stephen King, Glenn Gould, Georgia O'Keeffe, Joyce Carol Oates, Sinead O'Connor, Mercy Cunningham, Lily Tomlin, Tim Burton, Kurt Cobain, and Vincent van Gogh. Now, if you're a 5 with a 6 wing, that means that you lean more towards you're a 5, but you lean more towards a 6, which we haven't talked about yet, but we will. That means that you have the observation, right? You're an observer, but you tend to mix that with organization and detail, and that means that you tend to find a niche that provides security and that you are able to draw sort of larger conclusions, and you kind of work on repairing things. So you tend to combine your ability to observe with the dog and your ability to repair. It's kind of amazing. So people like this would be people like Stephen Hawking. Oh, think about that ability, that awareness. That's amazing. Bill Gates, again, an ability to think on a much larger scale than most people. Doris Lessing, Bobby Fischer, he's the chess champion. Laurie Anderson, Brian Eno, Jane Goodall, right? She's the one who's with the chimps. Isaac Asimov, the sci-fi writer. Amelia Earhart, the pilot. Charles Darwin, he's the one, the evolution, right? Big thinkers. They tend to be aggressive and to act. Oh, if you're in the average range, this is if you're a 5, but you're struggling. Those people tend to be aggressive and fairly antagonistic to people who disagree with them. And that's true for any 5 who's struggling. They tend to be antagonistic and struggle with people who are, who maybe they feel are antagonizing them. If 5s are in struggling with self-preservation, if they are dealing with feelings of being kind of defensive, they tend to become resentful of having any kind of restrictions placed on them. They tend to get angry or defensive. They can move toward hoarding behavior. They can become somewhat paranoid. They feel as though people are kind of out to get them, and this can become problematic. They tend to get very isolated. They tend to not like crowds. They tend to worry that people are trying to get them. They worry that they're going to be robbed. They worry that people are just out to get them. So it can be a real problem. They tend to become very isolated. In terms of sexuality. Um, it's, they tend to have very intense sexual drives. It can be somewhat dark or fetishistic. So they because they are so good at creating these dream worlds and so good at creating these fantasies, it can sometimes be overwhelming for their partner, and so they can seem somewhat intense, and it can be a little bit overwhelming for their sexual partner. And so fives just have to be careful. They have to kind of sometimes draw it in a little bit, and introduce that side of themselves sort of carefully or gently to a partner, and just be careful with that a little bit. They can often be very open and be very open-minded with others when they get involved. They can become a little bit more like nines. We'll talk more about nines when we get to them, but they can become a little bit more open, and they're very kind of like open to expressing their feelings, a lot like nines. Fives are, which is a very great thing. So that's a good thing about them when they are involved in relationships. Fives tend to withdraw into themselves when they get too when they become unhealthy. They tend to withdraw into themselves, and that can be a real wake-up call. It's something that they need to watch out for. Their world tends to shrink down into themselves, and that's something to watch for. So if you're a five and you feel as though your world is sort of shrinking down into you, and you're ignoring your support system, you find that your support system is shrinking down to the point where you feel as though you are the only one you can rely on. You are the only one who you can trust, or that there's only one other person. It's just you and your partner, or you and one other person. That's all you can trust. As your world begins to shrink down, that's when you need to really start to look at things and say, I think I need some support and some help. It's the warning sign is the idea that it's not all about power and control. You tend to minimize your needs. You tend to say, I don't need other people. I don't need anything from anyone else. I'm just simple in what I need, and I don't need things from others. And so all I need is here within myself. And it allows you to try and push other people away. And that's where you have to be really careful. You don't want to do that. You want to remember that you do need others, and you want to keep yourself open to other people. You want to, some other warning signs are physical neglect, the idea of letting yourself go, insomnia, if you're having terrible trouble sleeping, or you find that your sleep schedule is all over the place, you're sleeping too much, your sleep is all over the place, you're not sleeping regularly, loss of interest in social things. You used to go out and interact with others. You used to go and have, a bowling league, or you used to go and throw darts. You used to do whatever it is, whatever sort of social things you used to do. You're not doing them anymore. Refusing help, even being hostile to the idea of needing help. And at the extreme, things like hallucinations or suicidality. Those are things where at that point, when you start to get to those points, that's when it's really important to get some professional help, because those are areas where you've reached a point where your barometer is no longer accurately pointing you towards true north, and some support from an outside professional would be really good. And what some of the things that professional might suggest would be things like getting good exercise, getting physical, pulling you back into your body. Some DBT, some dialectical behavioral therapy would be getting you into yourself, reorienting you into your five senses again, so that you're using your sight, your hearing, your touch, your smell, your taste, even all of those senses, to get you back in your body, out of just your brain, get you back into your body. Meditation is good, but don't isolate yourself. So maybe yoga, or something where you're in a group, or maybe a bicycling club where you're out bicycling with a group and doing something, sort of exercising with a group. Working on some grief counseling would be wonderful for you, because chances are you've got some trauma or some grief that's unprocessed that would be really important to work through. You know, what are you maybe not, what haven't you dealt with, and what would be good for you to work through and deal with from your past. And what are some areas in your life that have been cut off that you would like to explore? You know, what are maybe some areas that weren't necessarily nurtured for you as a child that you would like to revisit, that are important, that weren't necessarily valued, but you would like to go back to? Maybe some areas of interest for you that you expressed early on, but were ridiculed or not taken seriously, and you would like to go back to them and find a way to develop those sides of yourself. This would be the time to do that, and to do it with some professional support, so that you can deal with whatever feelings of shame or guilt or embarrassment, to help you recognize that those voices of shame and guilt and embarrassment are not yours, and they're not God's, and but in fact are some particular person who may or may not have been right. Can be really, really helpful. Fives are really insightful and really perceptive, and can have some amazing kind of superpowers. And it just takes a little bit of confidence and a little bit of time to help them recognize that they have these superpowers, and they have these abilities to see the world in ways that others just don't and can't. And so with some time and effort and some confidence and assurance, they can develop these skills in amazing ways and do amazing things. I mean, Amelia Earhart and Darwin and Tim Burton, like, these are people who have done world-changing things. I mean, you know, even in a kind of cultural, pop culture way, like Stephen King. Like, these are people who've changed the world. So fives are pretty powerful, very powerful people, and that's you, very powerful people. Yes. So I hope that if you're a five, that you will maybe take a minute and recognize that you are just that powerful of a person. I'm going to put a link to a free Enneagram test on the link for this video, and that will allow you to go, and because it's important for you to have access to some options for testing so that you can see what type you are. Obviously, doing the tests at the beginning of each video is a good way to get started, and this will just be another option you can do online and see if you can gather some more information about what type you are, and see what fits for you. And next time we will be talking about type 6, the loyalist, and that's a good one. That's a fun one, and I hope to see you there. Please hit like and subscribe. That does me a world of good, and it's been a pleasure. I always love spending some time with you. All right, take care. Bye.